Welcome to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private.
Hi everyone, my name is Oliver and I'm a former addict in recovery. Welcome to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private. The Recovery Cast is a podcast created by people in recovery from addiction for people in recovery from addiction. There are many definitions of addiction, but we keep it simple. Addiction to us is when people use alcohol, drugs, or certain behaviours repetitively to their detriment, basically when it's a problem for them and their families. Therefore, an addict is not necessarily someone using a needle in a dark laneway, and an alcoholic is not necessarily a homeless man in a park. Recovery for us means using an active daily process or program to deal with alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, or other behavioural addictions. People in recovery are committed to complete abstinence. This daily process is as important to being able to live normal lives as daily dialysis is for people with kidney problems. This podcast is meant as a support tool for those in recovery. I myself am a drug addict in recovery. However, each day we will focus on a different perspective of recovery. Everyone who participates in the podcast is in an active recovery program. We are not affiliated with any one recovery methodology, however, and will focus on a variety of different types of recovery, including 12-step recovery programs such as Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Dharma Recovery, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, and more. And a quick disclaimer, this podcast is intended to be informative. A podcast alone cannot support your sobriety and your recovery, so we suggest it as only one component of a daily recovery routine. For more information on what recovery is, please go to www.rehab.melbourne. So today we're going to jump into a reading, and I've actually chosen a different reading. I usually alternate one day on the Just for Today Narcotics Anonymous reading, and then the other second, like every second day, I'll do the daily reflections from the Alcoholics Anonymous readings book. But today I'm going to do a reading called Walk in Dry Places for November the 21st. It's called Alcoholism in the Workplace and Employment. Most of the personal stories in AA include troubles in the workplace. This is not surprising because the disease itself almost guarantees that an active alcoholic is likely to make more mistakes, have higher absenteeism, and get into trouble with bosses and or fellow employees. Who really wants a practicing alcoholic on the payroll? Who would want such a person as a manager or employer? Who wants to be treated by a doctor who is drunk or badly hungover? If our alcoholism created problems in the workplace, we have no moral right to blame others who held us accountable for this. Far from blaming others who were critical of us, we owe personal amends for any harm we caused employers or fellow workers. The good news is that recovery makes it possible for us to perform up to acceptable standards and at work and carry out our responsibilities. In sobriety, we can write a new chapter and establish a good work history. In my work today, I'll keep in mind the wonderful advantages I have as a result of knowing and practicing the AA principles. As a recovering alcoholic, I can be a positive force in an organisation, it's really fitting. I chose this reading differently to the ones we've been doing before because I actually I did talk about working in recovery and what that can look like in a few days ago, and my experience of basically what it was like working in active addiction versus what it's like today. And this reading really sums it up quite well, talking about how, I do have advantages as a result of knowing and practicing the AA principles or NA principles. I mean, these spiritual principles are the same. And simply just because I am in recovery, I'm no longer using my memory is better. I'm more able to be a positive member of the workplace and a valuable member of the workforce in general. Interestingly, it also talks about if our alcoholism created problems in the workplace, we have no moral right to blame others who held us accountable for this. Far from blaming others who were critical of us, we owe personal amends for any harm we caused employers or fellow workers. And that's what I wanted to bring in today. We are up to step 9 in the 12 steps, and step 9 is we made direct amends. I can't paraphrase. I'm going to have to look up exactly what it says. I think it says we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So I'm going to have a chat to you guys about my experience working the 9th step, what it was all about, what it was like, what I got out of it, and maybe some stories, a story about what that was like, because it really really was an amazing experience, especially when I made an amends for the harm that I caused an employer. So I talked about this a little bit, I think, when I was talking about step 8, which is where I became willing to make amends to the list of people that I had harmed. So let me set the scene. I've become ready to make amends. Some of the amends I worked out that I actually didn't have to make directly. So it says we made direct amends wherever possible. And there are some examples, as I talked about, that aren't possible. For one that was difficult, it was still possible, and that was a workplace that I stole from. It was 8 years before I got into recovery. So time had gone by, but it was still very much sort of something that I was carrying with me, that I had harmed someone financially and directly through my addiction. I worked at a bottle shop, and I used to I stole alcohol from the workplace, and that came up on my list of people that I had harmed, and my sponsor, who was guiding me through, who has been on the show, John, he said that'll be the amends that I need to make first, which was funny because it was like jumping straight in the deep end. But I think there was a reason for that, and I'll talk about that. But before I tell you this amazing story, I want to read from the Green and Gold book, which is the Step Working Guides from Narcotics Anonymous, which is just a instructional sort of book of questions that you answer and information about the steps that prepares you for working the step actively. There's written work, and there's stuff that you need to read when you're doing it. That's I did the steps. I've done some of the steps this way. I also did the Alcoholics Anonymous way, which is more of a verbal way and definitely not as profoundly in depth as the NA way. Either way, doesn't matter. I'm not here to say that people should do steps any one way, but this is just my experience. So I'm going to read from the Step Working Guides now on step 9. We hear over and over in NA that the steps are written in order for a reason. Each step provides the spiritual preparation we'll need for the following steps. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the 9th step. We would never in a million years have been able to sit down with the people we've harmed and make direct amends without the spiritual preparation we got from the previous steps. If we had not done the work of admitting our own limitations, we wouldn't now have a foundation on which to stand while making our amends. If we had not developed a relationship with the God of our understanding, we wouldn't now have the faith and trust we need to work step 9. If we had not done our 4th and 5th steps, we probably would still be so confused about our personal responsibility, we might not even know for what we're making amends. If we hadn't developed humility in the 6th and 7th steps, we'd probably approach our amends with self-righteousness or anger and wind up doing more damage. The willingness we gained through our acceptance of personal responsibility made it possible for us to make our 8th step list. That list was our practical preparation for working the 9th step. The final preparations we're about to do in this step before we actually make our amends are mostly to strengthen what is already a part of us. The level at which we are able to practice the principle of forgiveness, the depth of insight we have, and the amount of self-awareness we are able to maintain throughout the amends process will depend on our previous experience with the steps and how much effort we're willing to put into our recovery. So it begins with 3 questions to set the scene. First question, how has my work on the previous 8 steps prepared me to work for the 9th step? That's a very personal and interesting one. I'll read the rest. How does honesty help in working this step? And how does humility help in working this step? I love those questions. They're really cool, really interesting. And I had to look up the definition of humility, which I will read. The quality of having a modest or low view of one's importance. I don't know about having a low view of my importance, but definitely a modest view, to realize that I am not the center of the universe. It's not all about me. It's kind of about being humble. It's one of the most powerful and important attributes of growth, both in and out of the ring. Being humble helps to build trust and facilitates learning, which are key aspects of leadership and personal development. Great peacemakers are all people of integrity, honesty, and humility. So I go out into the world with this sense of humility, and I'm trying to make peace with mostly myself, to be honest, because I carried these amends around. I owed a lot of people amends. I did a lot of harm in my addiction and also in my early recovery. I still do harm, and sometimes these things need to be like I need to make amends. And basically, to make it really, really kind of simple, basically, every deed I did that was harmful to others was like me putting a rock in my backpack. I've got this invisible backpack on my back, and throughout my life, maybe it's not every day, but every now and then I'll do something that harms someone, and that's like me putting a rock. It might be a small rock, it might be a bigger rock in this backpack, and I'm carrying it around. By the time I got into recovery, that backpack was so full to bursting that I could barely walk under the weight of my past deeds. And, I talked about the first 8 steps get me to the point where I'm ready to take the rocks out and show them to the people that I'd harmed and explain, well, I actually harmed you and I am responsible for it. And I accept that I did harm you and I caused you suffering either directly or indirectly, and I'm responsible for it. It's not necessarily about saying sorry, because I don't know about you, I said sorry a million times in active addiction and it meant nothing. There was an intention there that I didn't want to do something again, but I always ended up doing things again, saying sorry and doing them again, and sorry became a bit of a meaningless word to me. So what's actually more difficult and what is important about the 9th step is that rather than just saying sorry, we admit that we were responsible and we take personal responsibility for our actions, which is not something I ever did in active addiction. It was always somebody else's fault. So this is really cool. I'll tell you the story about my first and biggest amends after the break.
You're listening to the Recovery Cast by Hills and Rangers Private. Now playing daily on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. For more shows, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.
Fears and expectations. Making amends isn't always a nerve-wracking, joyless experience. Often we will feel excited about the prospect of healing a relationship. We may find that we're happily anticipating the relief of having made an amends. For most of us, however, we will feel fearful about at least some of our amends. We may be afraid that if we make financial amends, we won't have enough for ourselves. We may be afraid of rejection, retaliation, or something else. Well, I certainly was afraid of retaliation. I was afraid of having to make financial amends, but I had to become willing to do it. The fears I had about making amends were that I was going to get in trouble and I was actually going to have to pay back what I'd stolen from the workplace that I stole from. I really had to... The other question is, how does the 9th step require a new level of surrender to the program? Well, I just had to leave it up to the universe to decide what my former employer would do when I admitted that I stole from the workplace. And it says, what about financial amends? Do I have faith that the God of my understanding will ensure I have what I need, even though I am sacrificing to make amends? Well, I eventually psyched myself up and I emailed my former boss and I made an appointment at this, it's a hotel, so it was like a restaurant and a hotel, and it had a bottle shop attached to it, a drive-through bottle shop that I stole from. And over 8 years since I'd worked there, so the crime that I committed was very much in the past. But I made the appointment with the boss, the owner, and we sat down in the restaurant. It was empty. It was in the morning. And let me set the scene. The pokies are quietly, making their electronic noises in the background. And I walk in, and he's sitting there, and I sit down and I shake his hand and I say, "Hey, I said, I worked for you 8 years ago, and rather than just blurting out what I'd done, I actually set the scene and I said, well, it was a good place to work, and despite that, I was actually a very ungrateful employee, and I didn't work very hard. I was at a point in my life where I wasn't behaving in the most honourable manner, and throughout the course of my employment, I don't exactly know how much I took, but I took definitely in the thousands of dollars worth of stock, and I stole it, and I'm here because I am going through a period in my life where I've decided to how did I phrase it? Take a look at what I've done in the past and make it right. That's what I said. And the reason I'm here is because I just wanted to come clean and tell you, and make it right. And my boss looked at me, and he just started laughing. My former boss, after I'd admitted to stealing thousands of dollars worth of stock, he looked at me and he started laughing, and it really wasn't the expectation that I had. I was expecting his face to go red and him to tense up, ball his fists up, and start shouting at me and saying, well, our solicitors will be in touch with the, we're going to charge you, we're going to go through our old stock takes and work out what you took and charge you, and you'll get a criminal record, and you will, have to pay for it back and more. We'll pay for our litigation and stuff. And, that wasn't the case. And that was my fear. What was really important was that I actually came clean, admitted my responsibility, and he saw that. And he started laughing, and I was shocked. I was really shocked. He said, look, Oliver, you've come clean. We now have a really good manager employed with us that does a stock take every week. If anything like that happened today, we'd know about it straight away. You've come clean. You've said your piece, and what was important was actually I said to him when I was talking to him, I said, "Is there anything I can do to make it better?" And he said, "Just keep living your life and make sure you do the right thing." And It was phenomenal, because I looked him in the eye and I said, well, look, I don't behave in that way anymore, and I'm certainly not an ungrateful employee. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to work and to do things and to contribute to society. So we shook hands, and he was quite flabbergasted, because it was just very strange. I think laughing was his response, because it was just so bizarre. I don't think he'd ever, been subjected to an amends through a 12-step program. But what I felt when I was walking out of the hotel was like I had taken a boulder out of the invisible backpack on my back. I felt lighter. I felt amazing. I can't describe it. I felt phenomenal. And that was the first amends I made. I made countless small amends throughout, my recovery, and I'm still making the amends today. It's not just a matter of making the amends and moving on. It's a matter of continuing to make amends, and that's where we move on to step 10, is when we continue to take an inventory. We continue to look at ourselves and see what we've done, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. A couple of episodes ago, I talked about how I'd snapped at my family members and harmed them because of something that they were doing that I didn't like. And, I'm pleased to let you know that I did have to make an amends there, and I made an amends, and I admitted my part in it, that I was at fault. Not that, perhaps in my active addiction, I would have said, I would have said to them that you were doing this and it's your fault because you were doing that. If you weren't doing that, I wouldn't have gotten angry and done this, And I realized today that, I actually can't control what other people do. All I can control is what I do. And although I'm not perfect and I do make mistakes, I seek to make it right when I can. And it takes a lot of humility, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of willingness. And I've always had that willingness to work the program in my recovery, because I have this willingness to continue doing the work. I continue to realize that, it's not over. It's not just a matter of getting clean. It's a matter of going on that journey of personal growth and self-inquiry and growing and becoming a better person. And that's what it's all about. So that's really cool. I hope you enjoyed that little story. I'll talk more. All these things will be unpacked further in subsequent episodes of the Recovery Cast. Thank you for listening today. And if you have any questions, just jump on www.rehab.melbourne. The staff at Hills and Ranges Private have these experiences themselves, and they'll gladly share them with you if you have any questions. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again soon on another episode. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Recovery Cast. For more, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.